3 years, one word, and the word turned out to be the wrong one. It was starting to rain when I reached the cafe, and I was holding a paper bag that had cost me everything I had managed to save. I wasn't nervous. I was happy. That was the stupid part. The bag had a designer name on it she'd circled in a catalog months ago. Inside was the thing she said all the normal boyfriends bought. I'd finally bought it. I felt like I'd crossed a finish line. I'd worked to register through the night, run early parcel routes before dawn, then pulled day shifts hauling block on a building site. 3 jobs, 1 girl, 1 bag. The math had felt romantic right up until tonight. There was a note on my phone I checked like a prayer. 89,400 saved out of 90. I'd watched that number crawl up the whole time, coin by coin, and tonight I'd finally emptied it. My back still ached from the morning's load. My hands had a gray, worked into the creases that no soap ever got out. I told myself none of it mattered, because tonight she would smile, and the smile would balance the books. Sora was already at the table by the window, and she didn't stand up when she saw me. She just looked at the bag, then at me, the way you look at a bill you forgot was coming. "You actually came," she said. I sat down across from her and set the bag on the table between us, careful, like it might break. "Of course I came," I said. "I told you I would." She didn't touch it. She put one finger on the corner of the bag and pushed it a few inches back across the wet table, toward me, as if returning it before the conversation had even started. "We should talk like adults," she said. I knew that sentence. People only say, "Let's be adults," right before they do something a child would be ashamed of. "Talk like adults about what?" I asked. She finally looked at me, and her face was already rehearsed, already calm. "Kento, you know we hit a dead end," she said. "We both know it. A dead end." I let the words sit. Somewhere under the table, my hand found the old work badge in my coat pocket, the laminated one, edges worn soft from 3 years of clocking in. I held it without looking at it. "I saved 3 years for a dead end," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She sighed, the slow, practiced sigh of someone explaining weather to a slow child. "Don't make this ugly," she said. "I'm being honest with you. That's more than most people would do. Honesty." She kept reaching for these nice, clean words and wrapping the knife in them. 2 days ago, she'd asked, sweet as anything, whether I'd finished saving yet. I'd said, almost. I'd thought it was love asking. It turns out it was a clock, checking how much time it had left to run on me. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about getting your heart broken across a sticky cafe table. Some quiet part of your brain keeps working. Mine was listening to how smoothly she lied, filing it away. "I'm not trying to make it ugly," I said. "I just want to understand. 2 days ago, you asked me if I'd finished saving." I said almost. "You waited for me to finish saving, Sora. You waited for the bag." For 1/2 second, something crossed her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the irritation of a plan running a little long. Then her phone lit up on the table, and she turned it face down before I could see the name. "It's not about the bag," she said quickly. It was never about the bag, which was a fascinating thing to say, since the bag was the only reason I'd been allowed to keep showing up these last few months. Outside, through the glass, a car pulled up to the curb. Long, black, expensive in that quiet way that doesn't need a logo. The kind of car that makes a street feel cheap around it. Its horn tapped once, polite, restless. Sora's eyes went straight to it. Not a glance. A homecoming. Her whole body shifted toward that window like a plant finding the sun. And I understood the dead end was sitting in the back seat with the engine running. "That's my ride," she said, gathering her bag, her coat, herself. "Not our ride, not a taxi. My ride." 3 small words, and I finally heard the whole sentence she'd been afraid to say. I should have felt rage. I kept waiting for it to show up. Instead, there was this cold clarity, like the second after a glass breaks, when the noise stops and you can finally see every piece laid out on the floor. "You could have just told me," I said. "I wasn't begging. I want that on the record. I was almost curious. You didn't have to wait until I'd spent everything." She stood. She looked down at me, and for the first time all night, she said something honest by accident. "If I'd told you sooner, you'd have stopped trying so hard," she said, "and I liked watching you try." The horn tapped again. She left the bag on the table. She left me at the table. She walked toward the door and the rain, and I sat there, and did the only thing I had left to do, which was watch and remember. 3 years of overtime, and she returned the gift like a sweater that didn't fit. It occurred to me, with the strange calm of a man already at the bottom, that she could at least have kept the receipt. I picked the bag up off the table. I don't know why. Maybe because leaving it there felt like agreeing with her, so I stood and I followed her out into the rain, holding the most expensive mistake of my life by its little rope handles. The cafe door swung shut behind me, and the night was loud with water, and her ride was waiting under the awning of a building far too bright for a man like me to belong to. The car hadn't taken her yet. She'd stopped under the glass canopy of the place next door, the kind of restaurant with a doorman and a guest list and prices they don't print, and he was already there, waiting for her. I knew who he was before he opened his mouth, because men like him always announce themselves first with the watch, then the coat, then the smile. Atsushi, the horn in the car, the reason for the dead end. He put a hand on Sora's shoulder, easy, ownership without effort, and looked past her at me standing in the rain with my soaked paper bag. His eyes did a slow tour of my cheap shoes and stopped, amused. "This is him?" Atsushi said, and laughed, not even unkindly, which was worse. "You? Seriously? That's cute." He said it the way you'd say it to a dog wearing a little raincoat. "I just came to talk to Sora," I said. The doorman had drifted closer, two of them now, in matching coats, the way trouble arrives politely at nice places. 2 minutes. Then I'm gone. "There's nothing to talk about," Sora said, and she finally found her nerve now that he was standing behind her. "Just take it and go, Kento. Please. Don't make a scene in front of people." I held the bag out to her, one last time, not as a gift now, just to be rid of it. "Then take your dead end with you," I said. She didn't reach for it, she knocked it. She slapped it out of my hands into the wet like it was contaminated. The box hit the pavement and slid into a shallow puddle, and the beautiful packaging started to drink the rain and come apart. She looked at it lying there in the wet, and something in her face decided it wasn't hers to pick up. All that time I'd carried her groceries, her moods, her worst days. I'd thought I was building something. Standing in the rain, I finally understood I'd just been keeping a seat warm until a better offer pulled up to the curb. He called security on a man holding a gift bag. The thought passed through my head as I watched the doorman square up. Somewhere out there, a real threat is feeling deeply underappreciated tonight. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance," the doorman said, already taking my arm. Atsushi smiled wider and lifted his chin toward me, a little flick, like he was shooing a fly off his dessert. "You heard the man," Atsushi said. "Off you go. And hey," he glanced at the ruined box in the puddle, then at me. "Better luck next life, yeah?" A couple stepping out under umbrellas slowed to watch, then decided not to. I didn't fight. There was nothing to fight for. I let them walk me off the bright stretch of pavement and back into the dark and the rain, my arm held like I was something being removed rather than someone leaving. But I noticed the faces. That's the only thing I had left, so I used it. The couple under the umbrellas weren't looking at me with contempt. They were looking at him, at the man who'd called security on a guy holding a present. That was the part Atsushi didn't understand, and the part I filed away without knowing yet what it was worth. He thought he'd shown the crowd a king and a beggar. What the crowd actually saw was a cruelty that didn't need to happen. A king doesn't call for guards. A king doesn't need them. Only a man afraid of looking small reaches for someone bigger to do his shoving. I didn't have the words for it yet. I just felt the shape of it land somewhere I'd remember. I walked off with a straight back. Not for pride, I just couldn't think of anything else to do with my body. Behind me, the box lay in its puddle, and Sora stepped over it on her way inside, careful of her shoes. She didn't watch me go. She'd already turned toward the warm doorway, toward the music, and the man who'd never carried a single bag in his life. The last thing I saw of her was the back of her coat, disappearing into the light. The doors closed on warm light and music and the smell of food I'd never afford. The rain closed over me, and somewhere down the street, near a bus stop I was drifting toward without deciding to, a car's brake lights bloomed red in the dark. I didn't look back at the restaurant. There was nothing in it for me anymore. I looked at my hands, empty now, rain running off the knuckles, and I tried to feel something dramatic. I just felt tired all the way down. Somewhere in this city, people were sleeping in beds they owned, next to people who had chosen them and meant it. I wasn't angry at them. I just couldn't picture ever being one of them. That kind of life had a guest list too. I didn't know yet that the bottom is the one place nobody can throw you out of. There's a strange freedom in it. When you've already lost everything, the next person who tries to take something finds your hands are empty. And so are your fears. 3 years, I said out loud, to no one, to the rain. The street didn't answer. The water kept coming. I kept walking toward the only thing in this city that would still take me without a guest list. a wet bench under a flickering sign. The bus stop had a half-broken shelter and a bench with a missing slat, and I sat down on it anyway, in the rain, because the universe had clearly decided dry was for other people tonight. I took out my phone. No missed calls, no messages. The screen glowed up at me, blank and honest, the most truthful thing anyone had shown me all night. I looked at it for a while, then I turned it off. That's it. Everything I had, straight into the minus column. The verdict landed cleanly. I closed my eyes and let the rain hit my face and tried to figure out where a man goes when he's been emptied out completely and there's nowhere left to fall. That's when I heard tires on wet road, slowing, not passing, slowing. The expensive kind of quiet a heavy car makes when it's deciding to stop for someone specifically, which, in my experience, never happened. Cars like that did not stop for men like me. They slowed down only long enough to make sure they didn't catch my kind of luck on their paint. Then they moved on. I opened my eyes. A long car had pulled up at the curb in front of the bench, dark and gleaming, rain sliding off it in sheets. Not his car. A different machine entirely, the sort that made his look like it was trying too hard. The rear window came down a few inches, then more. Warm light inside. A figure I couldn't quite see, and then a woman's voice, low and certain, said a word I did not expect to hear from a stranger in a car worth more than my whole life. Kento, she said, just my name, but not the way people say a name they're guessing at. The way you say a name you've been carrying around for a long time, waiting for a face to attach it back to. I sat very still on my broken bench in the rain. I think you've got the wrong guy, I said. Nobody comes looking for me. People usually look the other way. It's kind of my whole thing. My fingers went to the badge in my pocket, still warm from my hand. For years, it had let me through a side door to mop and stack and smile. Now there wasn't a door anywhere in this city that wanted me. I'm not looking the other way, she said. The window came down the rest of the way, and I saw her, composed, flawless, dry in a world that was drowning. She watched me with an attention I hadn't earned and didn't trust. Kento, she said, I've been looking for you for a long time. A billionaire's car stops for me on the worst night of my life. The idea was absurd enough to make every option feel possible. Either I'm dreaming, I finally lost it, or I'm about 30 seconds from becoming an organ donor. I genuinely couldn't rank the options. Looking for me, I repeated. Why would anyone be looking for me? The rain ran down the back of my neck. She didn't blink. There was a stillness to her that wasn't cold exactly. More like patience, the kind that has already waited years and can wait a little longer without showing the strain. Because 6 years ago you did something, she said. And then you disappeared before anyone could thank you. I don't like leaving debts open. She said debt like it was a real number on a real page she intended to settle. I had no idea what she was talking about. I had no idea who she was. And yet she'd said my name like it mattered, on a night when I just learned exactly how little I was worth to the one person I'd given everything to. A secretary leaned in from the front seat, murmured something, and a phone glowed in her hand. The woman in the back never took her eyes off me. She was reading something on my soaked, beaten, ordinary face, and finding it more interesting than it had any right to be. Nobody had looked at me like that in years. Maybe nobody ever had. You're getting wet, she said. An absurd thing to point out to a man who'd been wet for an hour. Then she pushed the door open, and the warm light spilled out across the dark pavement. And she said the line that ended the worst night of my life and started everything that came after. Get in, she said. I have an offer. The inside of the car was warm and quiet in a way that money buys and the rest of us only visit. I sat dripping on leather worth more than my last apartment, and I tried not to leave a mark on anything. You can relax, she said, watching me hold myself stiff at the edge of the seat. It's a car. It survives weather. She didn't smile, but something in the set of her mouth suggested she found my caution mildly entertaining. I don't even know your name, I said. The city slid past the dark glass, getting glossier block by block. You know mine. You've apparently known it for a while. That feels a little uneven. Ray, she said. Just that. No surname, no title, like a person whose first name was already a building somewhere. And the unevenness is the point. I know exactly what I'm doing here. You don't. That's the only reason this works. 6 years ago, I said, you mentioned a debt. I think you've confused me with someone who's ever done anything worth a car like this. She turned then and looked at me fully, and the amusement went out of her face. There was a river, she said. A girl who couldn't swim went into it. A boy went in after her, pulled her out onto the bank, and then ran off before anyone could ask his name. She paused. He had a scar on his left hand from the rocks. So do you. I looked down at my left hand, the old white line across the knuckle that I never thought about. I remembered the river. I remembered being a cold, terrified kid who acted before he could think. I did not remember it being important. That was just a reflex, I said. Anyone would have. No, she cut in. Flat. They wouldn't. I've spent 6 years meeting the kind of people who wouldn't. I learned to tell the difference. That's partly why I'm here. The car turned through a gate that was taller than most houses, and a driveway unrolled in front of us, and at the end of it sat something that was less a home than a declaration. I stopped pretending I wasn't staring. You live here? I asked. She glanced up from her phone for half a second. It's one of 4 residences, she said, the way you'd mention you owned more than one umbrella. I decided not to ask about the other 3. Inside, the ceilings went up, and our footsteps had echoes. A woman was already waiting with a folder, sharp-eyed, unbothered by the soaked stranger trailing her boss across the marble. Ray nodded at her. Mira, my secretary. She's discreet, which is rare and expensive. Mira looked me up and down once, taking in the wet hair and the dripping coat, and filed me somewhere without a word. I got the feeling she'd watched stranger things walk through these doors. I also got the feeling she'd be proven right. Ray led me to a study and sat behind a desk that could have hosted a small dinner. She set a slim document in front of me and slid a pen across the wood, and her whole manner shifted into something colder and more precise. It's a contract, she said. Rule 1, no feelings. This is a business arrangement, not a love story, and it ends on a date written on page 4. Are you still listening, or has the house distracted you? That's usually the easy rule, I said. 3 hours ago, a woman had thrown a gift bag at my chest in the rain. Lady, my brain supplied, you are preaching to the recently converted. Out loud, I just said, keep going. She slid the contract a half-inch closer. You're taking this very calmly, she said, for a man who was sitting on a bench an hour ago. I used up tonight's panic already, I said. You're getting the discount version of me. 1 year, she said. You live here. You have an unlimited card. You appear beside me at events, functions, the places where my family likes to count my failures. In return, the marriage is on paper. Nobody touches the line you're thinking about. Why me? I asked. You could rent a better-looking prop with a nicer resume. Men like that line up for women like you. She studied me, and for a moment, I had the unsettling sense of being read rather than answered. My family wants me married to one of their candidates, she said. Every one of them is a walking corporate merger with a face attached. The second I sign with any of them, I stop being a person and become a clause. I'd rather not. You still haven't said why me, I said. She leaned back. Because I don't trust you, she said, and I can't be betrayed by someone whose loyalty I never bought. You have no stake in my family's games. That makes you the safest man in this city, and they'll believe it, I said. A stranger off a bus stop? My family treats anything they can't control as a threat, she said. A husband they didn't choose for me will frighten them more than the truth ever could. I'm counting on that. It was, I had to admit, a strangely flattering insult. You don't trust me, so you want to marry me, I said. I've heard worse logic tonight. Behind her, Mira's pen paused over her notepad just slightly, then kept moving. I looked at the contract. I looked at the dark window beside the desk and at my own reflection in it, soaked, hollowed out. A man who 6 hours ago had a girlfriend and a savings note and a plan. The reflection looked back like it dared me. Take your time, Ray said, in a voice that meant the opposite. But I noticed she was watching my hands, not my face, waiting for them to grab, waiting for the greed she'd clearly seen in everyone else who'd ever sat in this chair. I didn't ask about the money. I didn't ask what the card's limit was. I asked one thing instead. This costs you something too, I said. Marrying a stranger to keep your family out. What does it actually cost you? For the first time, the precision slipped. Just a flicker. Most people ask what they get, she said quietly. You asked what I lose. She didn't answer the question. She didn't have to. The flicker was the answer. I picked up the pen. Sora's voice rose in my head, the one word she'd used, nothing. So did the image of a man clicking his fingers for guards. I signed my name, once, clean, in the place she'd marked. I didn't know that one signature would unmake my whole life and build a new one in its place. I just wanted to stop hearing her voice in my head. Turns out the best way to do that is to give it something louder to look at. Ray looked at my signature for a moment longer than the moment required. Then she opened a drawer, took out a matte black card with no name and no number I could see, and held it out across the desk between two fingers. "Buy whatever you need," she said. I closed my hand around the card, the lightest thing in that enormous room, and somehow the one that was about to rearrange everything I believed about my life. Mira drove me into the bright heart of the city the next morning, to a district where the shops didn't keep prices in the windows, because if you needed to ask, you weren't the customer. She parked like she'd done this 100 times. She had. "So how does this work?" I said, turning the black card over in my fingers. It was heavier than a card should be. Everything in their world was heavier than it should be, as if weight were another thing you could afford. "I just walk in and point, you walk in, you point, and you do not flinch at the number," Mira said, leading me through a set of doors a doorman opened before we reached them. "Most people start with a watch or a car. The first purchase always tells me who someone is." "Does it?" I said. We were standing in a hall of glass cases, and the things inside them glittered with a confidence I had never felt about anything. A watch in the nearest case cost more than I'd earned in 2 years of 3 jobs. I looked at it the way you look at a building. Tall, far away, not for me. I kept walking, past the watches, past a showroom where a car turned slowly on a lit platform like a holy relic. Mira followed, and I could feel her recalibrating with every case I didn't stop at, her professional read of me developing cracks. "You're killing me," Mira murmured, as I walked past a coat that cost more than a year of my old rent. "Do you know how this looks in my report? Subject declined everything. They'll think I lost you in the parking lot. Tell them I'm slow," I said. Slow buys us both time. The truth was simpler than slow. I'd spent years learning that the things worth having don't sit in glass cases with lights on them. They sit in the quiet corners nobody guards, waiting for the one person steady enough to walk past the shiny part and pick them up. "You can have any of it," she said, an edge of confusion in her voice now. "That's the entire point of the card. People dream about a morning like this." "I'm sure they do," I said. "What I actually want is over there." I crossed to a small kiosk at the corner of the atrium, the one ordinary thing in the whole gleaming temple. A coffee counter, and beside it a rack of newspapers, real ones, ink and paper. I bought a black coffee and the day's financial paper. The total was almost insulting in how small it was. Mira stared at me. "That's it," she said. "That's the purchase." "I have a watch," I said, tapping the cheap thing on my wrist that still kept perfect time. "What I don't have is time. Coffee fixes one of those. The watch can wait." I sat at a little metal table with my coffee and opened the financial section, and the noise of the luxury hall faded out. For the first time in months, I felt something close to steady. Numbers don't lie to you. Numbers don't wait for you to finish saving and then leave. I ran my eyes down the columns, and somewhere on the 3rd page, a small line about a holding company's restructuring caught and held me. And without quite deciding to, I took a pen and underlined it. An old habit. The world leaves marks. You just have to be the kind of tired that notices them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mira lift her phone and start typing, fast, with the focused frown of someone filing a report. I didn't need to read it to know the shape of it. Subject: acquired caffeine and newsprint. Threat level: confusing. "Please advise." She caught me watching and didn't even pretend. "She's going to ask me what you bought," Mira said. "And when I tell her, she's going to make me repeat it. Tell her it came to under $4, I said. "Round up if it makes the report look better." Across the city, in an apartment that smelled of new money and old anxiety, Sora sat with her phone in her hand. She'd opened the chat with Kento. The last message in it was 3 days old, from him, hopeful about a Tuesday that never happened. Her thumb hovered over the empty text field. She didn't know what she'd write. Sorry would be a lie, and not sorry was too true to send. She typed nothing, deleted the nothing, and sat there while the screen dimmed, then went dark in her hand, showing her only her own reflection. She set the phone face down on the arm of the chair, the way you put down something you don't want looking back at you. Then she picked it up again. Then she set it down again. The new apartment was very large and very quiet around her. Back in the atrium, Mira slid her phone away and looked at me with something that wasn't quite respect, but was on the road to it. "You know," she said, "I've driven a lot of her arrangements to a lot of these shops. You're the first one who bought something you could read." "Reading's cheaper than regret," I said, folding the paper under my arm and standing. And it lasts longer. Mira tilted her head, studying me, the deadpan cracking just enough to let a real question through. What did you do, she said, before all this? There's a kind of seeing you only get from the bottom, I said. Up here, money is wallpaper. People stop noticing it. Down where I was, every coin had a name and a job. You learn to watch it move. You learn who's lying about it before they finish their sentence. Mira didn't write that one down. She just looked at me. Longer than before. I counted things, I said. Coins, shifts, hours, the days until the next paycheck. Turns out, if you count long enough, you start to see the patterns underneath. I dropped my empty cup in the bin. Anyway, where to next? I'm told I'm supposed to look expensive by dinner. Mira took a photo of the little receipt before I could throw it away. Coffee and a newspaper, the whole damning total, and sent it on. Somewhere in a glass tower, I'd learn much later, Ray looked at that photo of a $4 receipt for a good deal longer than $4 deserved. The next morning, a team of 6 arrived at the house before I'd finished my coffee. A tailor, 2 stylists, a man whose entire job was apparently shoes. They stood in a row and looked at me like a problem they'd been well paid to solve. "We're your team," the tailor said. "A team for what?" I said, still holding my mug. "For making you look like you belong in the room she's going to put you in," he said, not unkindly. "Fair enough." I sat down and let them work. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a montage with scissors, fabric, mirrors, thread and needles, a cuff turned, a shoulder pinned. Nobody asked my opinion, and for the first hour, I didn't offer one. The strange thing about being dressed by professionals is how fast you stop resisting it. Hour 1, I felt like a mannequin with opinions. Hour 2, I caught myself standing straighter without being told. The body learns the costume before the mind agrees to wear it. Then they brought out the expensive one, a jacket with a sheen to it, the kind of thing that announces its own price across a room before you've said a word. The tailor held it up like a trophy. I shook my head. "Too loud," I said. "Give me the plain one." Mira, watching from the doorway with her tablet, raised an eyebrow. "The expensive one says new money," she said. "The plain one says nothing." "Then I'll let it stay quiet," I said. The line passed through me as I watched a woman I'd just met decide which silence my jacket should make. I've worn the same 2 shirts for 3 years. Now there's a budget for my collar's emotional tone. The world is a strange place once you have a card. Mira tapped at her tablet, then handed the shoe man a note. A watch arrived a few minutes later in a flat box, restrained, plain-faced, no jewels shouting for attention. Exactly the one I'd have chosen if anyone had asked. Nobody had. "Her choice," Mira said, fastening it on my wrist before I could reach for it. "She sent the model down this morning." I looked at it. It was quiet and precise, and somehow already mine. It was the watch of a man who'd rather be underestimated. I didn't say anything about that. Neither did Mira. But she looked at me a beat too long, the way she had at the coffee counter, like a column of numbers that wasn't adding up the way she expected and was getting more interesting for it. 6 years of clocking in on a plastic badge, and now my wrist cost more than my old car. The badge was still in my coat pocket, for the record. I'd moved it from the old coat to the new one that morning, without quite deciding to. When they were done, they turned me toward the mirror. I'll be honest, I didn't recognize the first half second of the man looking back. Then I did. Same eyes, same tired, just better lit, in a coat that didn't apologize for taking up space. "Good," Mira said, surveying the result. "You clean up like someone who forgot he was supposed to be poor." "I didn't forget," I said. "I just stopped advertising it." She almost smiled. With Mira, almost was a standing ovation. She handed me an address on a card. "Ray wants you to pick up her order, alone. Today," she paused. "The most exclusive boutique in the city. You walk in like you own the street outside it." "And if I don't feel like I do?" I asked. "Then lie convincingly," she said. "It's the same thing, from the outside." What she didn't mention, what she maybe didn't know, was who else would be shopping in that boutique that afternoon. The city is enormous and somehow always exactly the size of the people you're trying to avoid. The boutique was the kind of place where the staff hold the power and everyone pretends otherwise. Soft lighting, hushed voices, a manager who could weigh your bank balance from the cut of your sleeve in under 3 seconds. I gave my name at the desk and a young assistant went to fetch the order, and I stood among the glass and the silk feeling the suit do its quiet work. And then, from across the floor, a voice I'd hoped never to hear again said, "Well, look who wandered in. Atsushi, of course, with Sora on his arm in something that still had its price tag tucked into the seam. They'd been at a counter of handbags, and now they were drifting toward me with the slow confidence of people who'd never once been removed from anywhere. "Nice costume," Atsushi said, loud enough to turn heads. A smile stretched wide. "What is this? A delivery? Did you wander off the loading dock? They let anyone try the samples now?" A couple of customers glanced over. Sora said nothing. She was looking at the watch. She'd recognized it, I think. Not the brand, the restraint. She'd spent 3 years telling me I had no taste, and here was taste, sitting on the wrist of the man she'd publicly thrown away. Her face wasn't jealousy yet. It was the first rough draft of it. I didn't answer him. I turned back to the assistant returning with my order and asked, calm as you like, whether the rest of it had arrived. Atsushi did not enjoy being unanswered. Men like him never do. Silence reads to them as insolence, which fair, it sometimes is. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, stepping closer, voice climbing. He looked around for the manager and snapped his fingers, actually snapped them in a luxury boutique. "Excuse me, this man isn't a customer. Get this one out. He's bothering us." The manager came over smoothly, unhurried, and I watched it happen in real time. The small glance at the screen behind the counter, the name attached to a standing account, the recalibration behind the eyes. He turned. He did not turn to me to remove me. He turned to me and bowed, a real bow from the waist, the kind these rooms reserve for the people who keep the lights on. "Of course, sir," he said warmly. "Right this way, your usual room is ready. May I bring you something while you wait?" For a moment, nobody moved. Atsushi's smile was still on his face, stranded there, like a man who'd reached the bottom step that wasn't there. "What?" he said. "No, not him. Him. Remove him." The manager turned to Atsushi now, and his warmth cooled by exactly the right number of degrees. "Sir, I'd ask you to lower your voice," the manager said. "You're disturbing our guest." Our guest. I watched the word land on Atsushi like cold water. I watched Sora's face do something complicated and quiet. Confidence is half of status, I decided. The other half, it turns out, you can rent with the suit. Returns accepted within 14 days. 2 women by the scarves had stopped pretending to shop. A man at the watch counter was watching openly now. The room had quietly picked a side, and it wasn't the side that was shouting. Atsushi felt it land on him. You could actually watch him feel it. And here's the part worth remembering. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't pulled a string or dropped a name or lifted a finger. Atsushi walked into a room, was cruel to the people who worked there, and the people who worked there simply decided whose side they were on. Sora lifted her phone. I saw her do it, angling it to film, to catch the moment, evidence to show Atsushi later that it was a trick, a fluke, a misunderstanding. Then she stopped. She set the phone face down on the glass counter, without recording a second of it. Some part of her didn't want the proof to exist. That was the first crack in her, though neither of us knew it yet. She'd come to that boutique to watch me fail in front of Atsushi, to collect the evidence that she'd chosen right. Instead, she watched a room full of strangers decide I mattered, and she put her phone down rather than record a truth she wasn't ready to own. People think betrayal is the hard part. It isn't. The hard part is the slow, private moment you realize you bet on the wrong horse, and the race is already running. I followed the manager toward the back, and as we walked, he murmured small talk about the order, and somewhere in it, he mentioned a supplier delay. A name, a payment that had gone out twice. He said it as nothing, as weather. But the second figure didn't match the first. A small thing, a wrong number where a right one should be. I filed it without breaking stride. Behind me, I heard Atsushi recover his voice, lower now, tighter, hissing into his phone as he steered Sora toward the doors. "Find me everything on that heiress," he was saying. "Every contract, every holding, every last thing she owns. I want to know what we're really dealing with." "Dig away then." I took the wrapped order with a nod I didn't have to fake anymore. Dig as deep as you like. In my experience, the men who go looking for someone else's foundation usually find their own first. I'd just have the timing ready when he did. That night, the holdings offices were nearly empty, screens dimmed to a low blue, the kind of quiet I actually like. Ray had given me a guest pass and a desk to wait at while she finished a call upstairs. I wasn't supposed to be working. I was supposed to be a husband, decoratively. But the open reports were right there on the shared drive. The public ones, nothing secret, quarterly summaries, vendor ledgers, the dull paperwork that runs an empire. Old habit took over. I started reading. The dull pages never lie, and at that hour, they were the only company in the building that didn't want something from me. Most husbands sneak around at 2 in the morning for romance. I'm sneaking around for a discrepancy in vendor payments. We all have our affairs. Mine just leave a paper trail instead of lipstick. Then a line caught. The same supplier the boutique manager had mentioned in passing. A payment that went out, then went out again, 3 weeks apart, routed a half step sideways through a name I didn't recognize. By itself, nothing. A clerical hiccup. Empires are full of them, except the timing was too clean. The second payment landed the same week a small, quiet leak had started chewing at one of Ray's deals. I'd seen the headline in the financial paper without knowing it touched her. Now the dates lined up like teeth in a gear. I'd spent years finding the few dollars a register came up short at the end of a shift. You learn to feel a number that's lying to you. This one was lying. I didn't know what about yet, but it had the exact texture of a lie I'd met before, and the texture is the tell. I didn't shout about it. I didn't even open anything I shouldn't. I just printed one page, the one with the name and the amount, and the date sitting together in a row, and I set it face down on the corner of the desk. Quietly, for later. Weight is everything with a thing like this, and I didn't have any yet. It's 2 in the morning, Mira said from the doorway, coat on, clearly heading home and not expecting company. What are you doing? Reading, I said, not turning the page over. Old habit, she frowned. Nobody reads quarterly vendor ledgers for fun, she said. I'm not having fun, I said. She looked at the screen, then at me, then at the single face-down sheet under my hand, and I watched the question form behind her eyes, the same one from the coffee counter, the boutique, the mirror. Who are you exactly? She didn't ask it. She was too smart to ask a question she wasn't ready to hear the answer to at 2 in the morning. Don't stay all night, she said instead. She doesn't pay you to ruin your eyes. She doesn't pay me at all, I said. It's a contract. There's a difference. Mira's mouth twitched, and she left. When the door clicked shut behind her, I slid the single sheet off the desk and folded it once into the inside pocket of the quiet new jacket against my chest. Not evidence yet, just a thread. I sat a while longer in the blue dark, turning the name over in my head. I wasn't angry at whoever it was. That's the thing nobody believes about me. You can't read numbers clearly while you're angry at them. Anger fogs the glass. I just wanted to see the shape of the truth, clean, before I decided what it was worth and to whom. But I'd pulled enough threads in my life to know how a whole thing comes apart when you find the right one. A week later, I was standing in the corner of Ray's boardroom, dressed like I belonged there, doing the one job she'd actually given me for the morning. Be present, say nothing, watch everyone. As jobs went, it suited me down to the ground. The room was glass and gray and very high up. The city spread out below like a circuit board. Ray sat at the head of the long table with Mira at her shoulder. The seats opposite were empty, then they filled. Atsushi walked in like he owned the building, and behind him came his father. I'd never seen the father before. He was an older, heavier version of the son, the swagger sanded down by years into something warier. He shook Ray's hand and called her by her first name like an uncle. Atsushi didn't shake anyone's hand. He sat, leaned back, and looked around the room as if pricing it. There were 2 advisors with the father, gray men with thin folders, the kind who exist to nod at the right moments and carry the blame later. They sat a careful half step behind him. Nobody introduced them. In rooms like this, the people who matter never need a name tag. Ray, good of you to make time, the father said, settling in. I think we both know why we're here. Our 2 houses do better as friends than strangers. This deal closes, and a lot of nervous people sleep better tonight. He smiled. It was a smile that had closed a lot of rooms. I've read the proposal, Ray said. She had a single folder in front of her, closed. Before we begin, I'd like to understand the obligations your group is carrying into it. The full picture. Not the version in the deck. The father's smile held, but his eyes did a small, quick thing. Atsushi jumped in before his father could answer, which I was beginning to learn was his entire personality. The obligations are standard, he said, waving a hand. Everybody carries paper. The point is the upside. You partner with us, your numbers go up. Our numbers go up. This is a formality, frankly. Here are the terms, Atsushi went on, sliding a sheet across the glass before his father could stop him. Joint venture, our name first, your capital, your distribution. We bring the idea, you bring the muscle. Split weighted our way, because frankly, the idea is the part that matters. He sat back, pleased with himself. I'd move fast. Offers like this don't sit on the table. A formality, Ray repeated, flat, not touching the sheet. Then formalize it. What are you carrying? Atsushi's jaw tightened. He didn't have the number, or he had it and didn't want it in the room. I knew that look. I'd worn the cheaper version of it standing in front of a register that came up short. Ray let his smile sit there, unanswered, until it started to look like effort. She had a way of receiving charm that made the charming person feel like they were performing to an empty theater. I'd been on the wrong end of something like it in the car. I almost felt for him. Almost. I watched the father's hand find his son's forearm under the edge of the table. A small squeeze. Quiet down. Atsushi shook it off. Look, he said, leaning forward, going for charm and landing on pressure. Let's not turn this into an audit. We sign on our terms today, or we walk. That's the offer. One of the gray advisors leaned to the father and murmured something behind his folder. The father's hand twitched on the table. Ray watched all of it. The murmur, the twitch, the son who wouldn't be still, and filed it. The same way I file things. Except she did it from the head of the table instead of the corner. The room went still. Mira's pen stopped. Even the city seemed to hold its breath out the window. I stayed exactly where I was, a quiet man in a quiet suit, watching a young man hand a loaded thing to someone far better at holding it than he was. Ray looked at Atsushi for a long moment. Then she said simply, "Then walk." 2 words. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean in. "The risk is yours, not mine," she said. "And the obligations you don't want to name are exactly the reason I won't sign. I don't insure other people's fires. Our fires," the father said quickly, trying to fold himself into her sentence, "are well managed. Whatever you think you've heard, I haven't heard anything," Ray said. "That's what worries me. A group your size, this exposed, and the market's gone quiet about it. Quiet costs money to buy. I keep wondering who's paying for it, and why." "You can't be serious," Atsushi said, the charm gone now, the voice climbing. "Do you have any idea what walking away from this costs you?" "The opportunity alone, Atsushi," the father said. "Just the name, low and hard. Sit down." But Atsushi was already standing, and he didn't sit. "No, she needs to hear this," Atsushi said. "She thinks because she's got 4 buildings and a dead father's name she can lecture me about risk. We came here to do you a favor, Atsushi." Louder now. The father's face had changed. It had gone a careful, controlled gray, the color of a man doing math he'd been avoiding. I watched the father do that math and arrive somewhere he didn't like. Because the thing about a number you've been hiding is that the hiding is the expensive part. Eventually, someone with a quiet voice and a closed folder asks you to say it out loud, and the whole structure you built to avoid saying it becomes the proof that it was true all along. Ray reached out and with one hand closed the folder in front of her. That was all. She closed it and slid it 2 inches to the side, off the table's center, out of play. The sound it made was very small. In that room, it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Atsushi laughed once, an ugly, disbelieving sound. "You're bluffing," he said. "You need this deal as much as we do." Ray didn't even look at him. "Mira," she said, "show them our exposure to their group." Mira slid a single page across the glass. The father read it without picking it up. Whatever was on it, he didn't call her bluff again. "This meeting's over," she said. "Mira will see you out." She stood. The father stood with her, faster than was dignified, one hand half raised. "Ray, wait. Let's not be hasty." The boy speaks out of turn. "Give me a day. I can restructure. I can show you I've seen enough of the structure," Ray said. "That's the problem. And here's where I'll be honest about my own part, which is that I had none. I stood in the corner, and I didn't move, and I didn't speak." But the reason she'd known to ask about the obligations, the reason she'd had a number in her head before they walked in, was a single folded sheet that had spent the week against my chest. She'd never said so. She didn't have to. She'd simply walked in already knowing where the floor was thin. Atsushi calls it a series of bold investments, I noted, watching him go pale by the window. I'd keep the word series. The other 2 words are doing a lot of unpaid overtime. The father didn't follow Mira to the door right away. He stood there a second longer, and then he turned, slowly, and looked at his son, not with anger yet, with something underneath the anger, something closer to fear. And he said the 4 words that I knew were going to follow Atsushi all the way down. "What did you do?" That evening, across the city, Sora sat in a restaurant that cost too much and felt like too little, waiting for Atsushi to stop being on his phone. He'd been like this since the meeting he wouldn't talk about. Tight, snapping at waiters, checking his screen as if it owed him money. She wasn't supposed to be bored. This was the life she'd chosen, the one with the car and the name and the rooms that smelled of money. She kept telling herself she'd chosen well. She'd been telling herself that a lot lately. The telling was getting louder, which she tried not to notice. A waiter came and described the specials in loving detail. Atsushi didn't look up from his phone. "Just bring whatever's most expensive," he said, which Sora had once found impressive, and now, for reasons she couldn't name, found exhausting. She ordered for herself. The waiter looked at her with something close to sympathy. To fill the silence, she did what bored people do. She picked up her phone and typed in a name, Ray. The name the boutique manager had bowed over. The name Atsushi had been hissing into his phone for a week. She added the word she'd half heard, the holding, the company. She hit search. The results loaded, and the first photograph stopped her thumb mid-scroll. A business conference. Front row. A woman who looked carved out of winter, perfectly still, in a sea of important men. The caption underneath read like something from a different planet. Heiress, holding group, net worth, over 4 billion. And next to that number, 2 photographs down, was a second image. The same woman, at some gala, and beside her, in a dark suit that fit like it had grown on him, calm and unbothered and entirely at home, was Kento, her Kento. The dead end. The man she'd thrown a bag at and walked away from. "It's a paper marriage," Atsushi said. He'd finally looked up, seen her screen, and put his phone down to deal with hers. "I had people look into it. It's a stunt. She married a nobody to keep her family off her back. He's a prop, a rented face. It means nothing." He said it fast, the way you say a thing you need to be true. 4 billion, Sora said slowly, still looking at the screen, "is a lot of paper. Drop it," Atsushi said. The word came out harder than he meant, and a couple at the next table glanced over. He smoothed his voice. "Drop it." He got lucky for 5 minutes. People like him always land back where they started. Watch. But she'd heard him say, watch about a lot of things lately. Watch, the contract will save us. Watch, my father will calm down. Watch, that nobody will be back on the street by winter. The word had started to sound less like a prediction and more like a man trying to talk a falling thing into not hitting the ground. Sora set the phone face down on the white tablecloth. She told herself it was because Atsushi didn't like her on it at dinner. That was the reason. She turned it over and put it down and looked at the window instead, at the lit-up city, at the table reflected back in the dark glass. Under the table, almost without deciding to, she opened the phone again in her lap, below the cloth, out of his sight. She started to type a search, how to annul a marriage of convenience, and the autocorrect, helpful as ever, offered her something else entirely. How to annul my choice. She deleted it fast, like it had burned her. It was just autocorrect, a glitch. Machines don't know anything. She told herself that twice, which is exactly one more time than you tell yourself something you actually believe. She put the phone away for good after that. She didn't take it out again all evening, even when it buzzed. Across the table, Atsushi was back on his own screen, jaw working, and the gap between them on the white cloth seemed to widen by the minute, though neither of them moved an inch. She looked at the window again. In the dark glass, the restaurant glowed warm and full. Couples leaning toward each other, candles, wine. And in the middle of all of it, reflected back at her, was one woman alone at a table, looking at a man who wasn't looking at her. It took her a moment to recognize that the woman was herself. She thought about the bag, the one she'd knocked into the puddle and stepped over without breaking stride. She told herself it was a cheap gesture from a cheap man. Now she did the sum she'd been avoiding, 3 years of his life, folded into a box she hadn't even bent down to pick up. The arithmetic of it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. She remembered something else too, something she'd buried fast. The night she left him, he hadn't shouted, he hadn't begged. He just looked at her with a strange, quiet attention, like he was filing the moment away for later. At the time, she'd thought it was weakness. Now, with 4 billion glowing on her screen, she wondered what exactly he'd been filing and whether her name was somewhere in it. She didn't cry. She wasn't the crying kind, not yet. She just sat with the picture of Kento still burning behind her eyes. Not the soaked man on the bench, but the one in the dark suit who looked like he'd been built for rooms she'd only ever stood at the edge of. And for the first time, very quietly, she let herself wonder if she'd read the whole thing exactly backwards. Across the table, Atsushi said her name twice before she heard it. She put the smile back on, the practiced one, and it sat on her face like a coat that no longer fit. Some part of her had already left the restaurant, and it wasn't coming back to this table. 3 days after the boardroom, the family called an emergency meeting of their own, and I ended up at it the way I end up everywhere now, quietly, in a corner, a husband on display. Ray had been invited as a courtesy. She sent me in her place to listen. I am very good at listening. Her instruction had been one sentence. Watch what he does when the money's already gone, she'd said. People are honest in the rubble. It's the only time you see what they actually are. So I went, and I watched, and she was right, the way she's irritatingly often right. It was the father's office this time, not Ray's, but the same gray light, the same too-high view, the same long table. Except now the table was full of investors. Nervous men with thin smiles who'd put real money into the family group and had started this week to ask hard questions about where it had gone. Atsushi sat near the middle, talking too fast, doing the thing he always did, which was treat panic like a sales pitch. It's under control, he was saying. Completely under control. A short-term liquidity thing. We've bridged it. By the gala next week, this is a story we laugh about. I promise you. I noticed he'd sat 3 seats down from the head of the table. The head chair, his father's chair, sat empty while the father stood by the window, and Atsushi kept his eyes carefully, deliberately, off it. A man can tell you everything by the chair he refuses to look at. He kept reaching for the empty chair's authority without daring to sit in it. Every time he said we, he glanced at his father's back by the window, checking, the way a kid checks whether the parent saw the broken vase. A grown man, still doing it. Some people never get to stop. Bridged it how? One of the investors asked. He was older, calm, the dangerous kind. Last we spoke, the shortfall wasn't the sort of thing you bridge over a weekend. Atsushi's smile flickered. I handled it, he said. I took a short loan to cover the gap. It's handled, father. I took a short. You did what? The father turned from the window. His voice cracked across the room like something structural giving way. You took a loan. Against what? Tell me you didn't put the last clean thing we own against a weekend loan to save face in front of. He didn't finish. He crossed the room instead, and he slapped his son, open hand, full weight, across the face, in front of every investor at that table. The sound of it was enormous in the silence, a flat, awful crack that seemed to keep ringing after it should have stopped. Nobody breathed. A glass of water sat trembling from the impact on the table. I came here to watch a man lose a contract, I noted from my corner. The family theater is a bonus. No intermission, by the look of it. Atsushi didn't lift a hand to his cheek. He just sat there, the red mark blooming, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. Everyone's watching, he said very quietly, which told you exactly what still mattered to him even now. Not the loan, not the company, the room. Who was watching him be small? Let them watch, the father said, and his voice had gone from thunder to something worse, something flat and final. You did this. Not her. Not him. He didn't look at me when he said him, but I felt it anyway. The investments were yours. The lies about them were yours. I covered for you, and you used the cover to dig deeper. That was the part worth catching, and I caught it. The investments were yours, before me, before Ray, before the rain and the bag and any of it. I hadn't built this man's grave. He'd been digging it quietly for years, and all I'd done was happen to be standing nearby with good timing when the floor finally went. There's a thing people get wrong about revenge, and I'd been getting it wrong too, in the small hours when I let myself think about it. You picture yourself shoving the enemy off a ledge, but the dangerous ones are already falling when you meet them. The only real skill is not getting grabbed on the way down. The investors were already gathering coats. That's the thing about money. It's loyal exactly until the second it isn't, and then it's gone before you finished your sentence. The calm, older one paused by Atsushi's chair on his way out. We'll be in touch, he said, which everyone in the room knew meant the opposite. Atsushi sat in the emptying room and finally touched his cheek, lightly, like he was checking it was still his. Then he took out his phone. I watched his thumb move, watched him start to make calls, the panic reorganizing itself into a new plan, because men like Atsushi never run out of plans, only out of room. His father had stopped looking at him entirely. That was the cruelest part, and Atsushi felt it. I saw him feel it. A slap you recover from. A man can wear a red cheek and tell himself it was heat, not verdict. But a father who simply turns his back has already done the math and closed the folder. There's no loan that bridges that. The gala, I heard him say into the phone, low and urgent, turning away from his father's back. The merger gala next week. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Get me in front of the right people and I'll fix this myself. I don't care how. I'll get in that room if I have to come through the kitchen. I filed that too. People tell you their whole plan when they think no one important is listening. The next evening, there was a reception, one of those events where the city's money puts on its good clothes and circles itself. Sora was there on Atsushi's arm, in a gown she hadn't paid for, smiling the bright, fixed smile of a woman determined to look like nothing was wrong. Atsushi was performing too, laughing a half beat too loud at the right men's jokes, gripping the right shoulders, working the room like the room was a fire he could talk into staying lit. Sora stood beside him and held a glass she wasn't drinking and tried to remember when standing next to him had felt like an arrival instead of a job. She remembered the first time she'd walked into a room on his arm, the heads that turned, the warmth of being chosen by someone everyone else wanted. It had felt like winning. Nobody warns you that some prizes come with a return policy and that the store keeps the receipt, not you. His phone lit up on the high table between them, face up just for a moment before he covered it. But Sora was close, and her eyes were quick, and she read it before he could move his hand. A message, a name saved as nothing but initials, and a line she wished she hadn't seen. Final notice, full amount due. The number was very large, and the deadline was very soon. She looked away fast, out at the crowd, and arranged her face into something pleasant, as if she'd seen nothing at all. But her hand, the one resting on his arm, tightened. She didn't decide to do it. Her fingers just closed harder on his sleeve, the way you grip a railing when the floor tilts under you and you're pretending it didn't. The number stayed behind her eyes. She kept doing involuntary math with it, what it would take, how many of these smiling nights it stood for, whether there was any version of the future where it simply went away. The answer kept arriving the same, more than they had, more than they were going to have. The smile on her face had nothing to do with the arithmetic underneath it. Smile, Atsushi murmured, sliding the phone into his jacket without looking at her. People are watching. I am smiling, she said through the smile. Smile like you mean it, he said, scanning the room over her head, already moving toward his next handshake, already gone. A woman beside her at the table leaned in, friendly, a little tipsy. You must be so happy, she said. You haven't stopped smiling all night. Sora kept the smile bolted in place. Just happy, she said, through her teeth, the muscles in her jaw beginning to ache from the effort of it. You sure? The woman laughed. You look like your jaw might be locked. It's not, Sora said, and let the smile drop the second the woman turned away and felt the relief of it like setting down something heavy. She looked back at Atsushi, 3 guests deep into the crowd now, laughing at something, sweat at his collar. She looked at his hand, the one she'd been gripping, now gesturing wide as he told some story to men who would not save him. And for a moment, it didn't look like the hand of the man she'd traded everything for. It looked like a stranger's hand, a hand attached to a falling thing, reaching out, grabbing at the air on the way down. She thought, unbidden, of another man's hands, gray in the creases, careful with a paper bag, holding it out to her in the rain like it was something worth giving. She'd thought those hands were the problem. She was beginning to suspect they'd been the only honest thing she'd held in 3 years, and she'd dropped it in a puddle. She put her glass down. She didn't finish it. Across the room, Atsushi caught her eye and made a small, restless gesture. Come here, work the room, be useful. She went, because that was the deal she'd signed without anyone making her read it. But she went slowly, and she didn't fix the smile back on until she had to. On the far side of the hall, a screen cycled through the sponsors of the following week's merger gala, the event Atsushi was so desperate to crash. One name dominated the rotation, clean and enormous, Rei's Holding. The room Atsushi was begging his way into belonged, in every way that counted, to the woman whose husband he'd called a nobody on a wet curb. Sora looked at that logo for a long time. Then she went to find Atsushi because there was nowhere else to go, and the smile she fixed back on cost her more than the borrowed gown had. It was nearly midnight when I found Rei still at her desk in the dimmed office, the city burning low and electric outside the glass. She didn't look up. You should be asleep, she said. Tomorrow's the gala. I need you rested and decorative. I'll sleep when I'm done, I said. I brought you something. I crossed the room and set a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of her, face up this time. 1 page, a name, the head of your PR, an amount, a date, nothing else. No explanation, no theory, no paragraph walking her through how the pieces fit. Just the 3 things that matter, sitting in a row where she could see them. She went very still. She read it once. Then she read it again, slower, and I watched something move behind her face that I hadn't seen there before. Not surprise exactly, but the particular stillness of a person recalculating a number they'd been sure of for a long time. "This is the leak," she said. "Not a question. The deal that's been bleeding for a month. The one my legal team swore was just bad luck and market noise." "It's not noise," I said. "Someone inside your house has been selling the weather forecast, the dates when she was paid, the amounts what your trouble was worth to her." "How long?" Ray said quietly. "Have you known?" "Long enough to be sure," I said. "I don't bring you a thing like this until I'm sure. Half sure is worse than nothing. It just teaches the rat to hide better." She looked up at me then, finally, fully, and the look was different from any she'd given me before. "My legal department spent 3 weeks on this," she said. "I pay them a fortune. I pay them specifically to find things like this, and they found nothing. And you," she stopped. She set her palm flat on the page, covering the name, and looked at me like she was seeing a stranger sit down in a chair she thought she'd already filled. "Who are you, really?" 3 years of night shifts and a library card. The library part she will absolutely not believe. "I'm a man who worked 3 jobs and learned to count," I said. "That's all this is. People think money hides in clever places. It doesn't. It hides in the boring ones. The line nobody reads, the payment that's a little too round, the date that sits a little too close to bad news. I just read the boring parts. I've had a lot of practice with boring." "Nobody reads the boring parts," she said. "I do," I said. "It's the only place anyone ever tells the truth by accident." She kept her hand on the page. She didn't move it. The silence stretched, and it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind with weight in it, the kind where 2 people are deciding whether the floor between them just changed shape. She stood and came around the desk, slowly, and stopped in front of me, closer than the contract strictly allowed. "My whole life," she said, "people have wanted things from me. The money, the name, the access. I learned to find the want in a person inside the first minute. It's how I've stayed alive in rooms like that one." She paused. "I've been hunting for yours for weeks. I can't find it. It's making me insane." "Maybe I don't have one," I said. "Everyone has one," she said. "Then maybe mine's boring too," I said. "I wanted to stop being a man things happen to. That's the whole engine. It's not romantic, and it doesn't scale." She studied me like a page that wouldn't balance. For once, I was the number that didn't add up, and I found, to my surprise, I didn't mind being read for a change. "You could have used this," she said, touching the sheet. "Found the leak, sat on it, traded it to me for something. More money, an early exit from the contract. That's what everyone in my life would have done." "Why didn't you?" "Because then you'd know the price of me," I said. "I've spent my whole life being something people could afford. I wanted, just once, to be a thing nobody could put a number on." "Rule 1, she said at last, almost to herself. "No feelings." "I remember the rule," I said. "I'm not breaking it. I found you a rat. That's a business service. Bill me." Something at the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, she didn't do those. But the place a smile would have started if she'd let it. "Go to bed, Kento," she said, but the cold had gone out of it. And as I turned to leave, I saw her look down at the page again and lay her hand back over the name and keep it there a moment longer than the page required. The way you hold down a thing you're not ready to let blow away. I went to bed. I did not sleep much. Tomorrow there was a gala and 200 of the city's most important people and a man so frightened of being small that he'd come in through the kitchen to feel big one last time. I'd been building toward that room for weeks without telling anyone, including, mostly, myself. The rat was just the warm-up. The real thing was already loaded, and it had Atsushi's name on it. The gala was the kind of event you could feel from the parking garage, a current in the air, the hum of 200 important people gathered to celebrate a merger and quietly measure each other. I walked in beside Ray in the quiet suit and the quiet watch, and for the length of the entrance hall, I felt almost calm. I'd learned a few things by now about rooms like this. You don't scan them. You let them scan you. You walk like the floor was poured for your shoes. Ray had taught me half of it on purpose, and the other half just by existing next to me, the way the cold teaches you to find your coat. "You're nervous," she murmured, not looking at me, smiling at someone over my shoulder. "I'm calm," I said. "Your jaw isn't," she said. "Relax it. Tonight you only have one job. Stand here and look expensive," I said. "You're learning," she said, and there it was. The almost smile, gone before anyone could photograph it. Mira worked the floor in a dark dress, steering Ray's evening like air traffic control. She caught my eye once and gave me a small nod. Approval, maybe, or just confirmation that I hadn't embarrassed anyone yet. From Mira, a nod was practically an embrace. What I didn't know, what she hadn't told me, because she enjoyed her small cruelties, was that she had a second job for me, and she'd written it into the program. Halfway through the evening, Between the speeches, she stepped up onto the low stage and took the microphone, and the room turned toward her like it was paid to. I'd assumed I was there to be furniture, handsome, silent, expensive furniture, parked beside her where the cameras could find it. I'd gotten comfortable being furniture. It's the one role in the world where nobody ever asks you to explain yourself. Thank you all for coming, she said. The hum dropped to nothing. When Ray speaks, money listens. Because money has learned it's usually about to find out something it needs to know. Before the formalities, I'd like to introduce someone. Most of you have wondered about him. Some of you have asked. A few of you have been rude enough to investigate. A ripple of careful laughter. Her eyes found me across the room, and I felt the first cold drop of understanding slide down my spine. I don't usually explain my decisions, Ray said. I'm going to make an exception once, so that nobody in this room has to whisper about it again. She paused, and the pause was a blade. This is my husband and my co-owner. The room stood up. I want to be precise about that because I've replayed it 100 times since. 200 of the most important people in the city rose to their feet and turned toward a man who, 3 months ago, had been thrown into the rain over a paper bag. They stood up. For me. 200 people had just decided I was somebody. I kept my face very still while my heart did something undignified. Same suit I had on yesterday when a barista called me buddy and got my order wrong. The suit hasn't changed. Apparently the only thing that changes is who's looking. I had no idea, a man near me said, shaking my hand with sudden warmth, pressing a card into it. An absolute pleasure. We should talk. Neither did I, technically, until about 40 seconds ago. That part stayed inside my head. Out loud, I said something gracious. The gracious things come easier now. Turns out, half of class is just declining to panic out loud. Cards kept appearing in my hand. Men who wouldn't have held a door for me a season ago now wanted 20 minutes of my week. I pocketed them and kept my face polite. None of them had changed their mind about me. They'd only changed their mind about my address. And then, the way you find the one face you're looking for in any crowd, I found Sora's. She was across the room on the arm of a man who wasn't beside her anymore. Atsushi had drifted off somewhere, and she was staring at the stage. At me, with an expression I'd never once seen her wear in all the time I'd known her. Doubt all the way down to the floor. Her dress was beautiful and brand new, and one small thing was wrong with it. The price tag still hung from the seam under her arm, a little white flag she hadn't cut. Because you don't cut the tag off a dress you intend to return. She kept her elbow pressed to her side all night to hide it. I noticed because noticing is the only thing I've ever been good at. I looked at that hidden tag and I felt the strangest absence of triumph. I'd imagined this moment on a wet bench, half drowned, at the bottom of my life. I thought it would taste like victory. It mostly tasted like an old door quietly closing in a house I didn't live in anymore. She knew I'd seen it. The tag, the doubt, all of it. She held my eyes for 1 second, and her mouth opened like she might cross the room and say something, an explanation, an apology, a 3-year late confession. Then the moment broke. She turned fast toward the edge of the hall, toward the service doors at the back, the way you leave a room when the room has stopped being yours. And as she turned, a figure slipped past her through those same service doors, going the wrong way, in from the back where the staff and the deliveries came and went. Dark suit. Wrong entrance. I only caught him for half a second before the crowd closed up, but I knew the walk. Atsushi had arrived. He just hadn't come through the front. I stepped out of the heat and noise onto a quiet half landing off the main hall, a balcony of sorts that looked out over the lit-up city, and I let myself breathe for the first time all night. A man can only be applauded by strangers for so long before he needs a window and no audience. Ray found me there a few minutes later. She came and stood beside me at the rail, not too close, the contract's distance, and for a while neither of us said anything. Below us, the city went on with its enormous, indifferent business, 1 million lit windows, and not one of them ours. It's a strange thing, standing above a city that spent your whole life looking straight through you. From up here you can't hear it laugh, or honk, or call you buddy. From up here, it's just lights. I'd lived for years down inside those lights, invisible. Now I was above them, beside a woman who'd reached down and pulled me up, still half expecting the rope to give. You didn't warn me, I said finally, about the co-owner part. No, she agreed. Would you have done it well if I had? You're better when you don't have time to be afraid. She had a point, which was annoying. It's true, by the way, she added. The paperwork went through this week. It's not a line. It's a fact now. Why? I said. Not why the title, why the speech, the standing room, the public choosing of a man she'd hired to be invisible. She looked out at the city for a long moment. Don't read into the speech, she said. It protects the holding to have a clear second name on it. It's an investment, that's all. It's an investment, she said, not looking at me. And for a second I almost believed it was about money. Almost. But I'm an analyst, and I do this for a living, and the numbers didn't add up. You don't stand a whole room up for an investment. You don't choose a face that publicly for a balance sheet. The math was off, and the only variable that fixed it was one she wouldn't say out loud. Right, I said, letting her have it, because some people can only walk toward a thing if you promise not to name it. An investment. Smart. Good return on a wet guy from a bus stop. Her hand was on the rail, near mine. Closer than the contract. She didn't move it away, and she didn't move it the last inch either. She just left it there, in the space between, like a question she hadn't decided whether to ask.
A man raised to believe he is his status will do anything rather than be seen without it. Cornered, the smart move is to go quiet and retreat. But terror doesn't choose smart, it chooses loud. And loud, in a room full of witnesses, is how a clever man hands you the rope and ties the knot himself.
Don't be late tomorrow, she said, quieter now, and it had nothing to do with tomorrow. It was the only way she had of saying the thing the contract forbade, a small, sideways tenderness, smuggled out under a logistics note. I understood it. I let her keep the disguise. I'm never late, I said. It's the one thing being poor teaches you for free. She almost smiled again, twice in one night. A personal record, and then from below, from the bright hall we'd left, came a sound that didn't belong. A scrape of feedback. A voice on a microphone that wasn't a scheduled voice. The hum of 200 people turning towards something going wrong. Ray's head came up. So did mine. That's not the program, she said. No, I said, already moving toward the doors, already feeling the night tilt onto the track I'd half built for it without admitting I was building anything. It's not, but I wasn't afraid. That was the strange part. I'd been waiting for this without knowing its shape, and now its shape was walking onto a stage with a microphone it hadn't been handed. Here is what I pieced together later, and what the gala's own cameras showed. Atsushi hadn't been invited. After the slap, after the investors walked, after the loan that bridged nothing, his name was on no list at the door. So he didn't use the door. He went around the back, to where the catering trucks idled and the dumpsters sat, and he walked in through the kitchen, a frightened man in a tuxedo, picking his way past the trash and the steam and the line cooks who stared, to reach a room full of the people he needed to impress. A man came in past the dumpsters in a tuxedo to save his reputation. The symbolism writes itself. I just got to stand there and watch it land. A member of the gala security found me at the edge of the hall as the feedback screeched, professional and quiet, leaning in close. Sir, he said, we've got a gentleman who came in through the service entrance, not on any list. He's got hold of a floor microphone near the stage. Do you want him removed? Every instinct a normal man has would have said yes. Get him out. Kill the feed, save the evening, protect the room. And 3 months ago, I'd have panicked. Because 3 months ago, I had everything to lose and no cards to lose it with. But I'd spent those 3 months reading the boring parts, and I knew exactly what Atsushi was holding, and exactly what he wasn't. Good, I said. The security man blinked. Sir? You want me to? No, I said. Leave him. Let him talk. Because here's the thing about a man who breaks into a room to expose someone. He can only expose what he actually knows. And Atsushi had spent a week digging into Rei's contracts, her holdings, her every last thing, and in all that frantic digging, he had never once thought to look at his own. He looked like he was about to ruin me as he raised the microphone, his face shining, the whole crowd swinging toward him. He has no idea he's standing on the one trapdoor in the building, and that he walked across the entire city tonight, through a kitchen, past the garbage, just to find it and stand on it. I'm not going to push him. I don't have to. He came all this way to jump. Good, I said again, softly. To no one, and I didn't move to stop a single thing. Rei came up beside me, read my face, read the calm on it, and understood. I watched her understand that whatever was about to happen, I'd already known it was coming, and I'd already decided to let it. She didn't ask. She just stepped back, into the dark at the edge of the stage, and waited for her cue. People kept asking me afterward whether I'd planned it, the kitchen, the microphone, all of it. I didn't plan Atsushi. You can't plan a man like that. You can only know which way he'll fall, and make sure you aren't standing under him when he does. I'd spent 3 quiet months getting the ground ready. He brought himself the rest of the way. Atsushi tapped the microphone. The hall went quiet, the way a hall goes quiet when something is about to go very wrong for somebody. And everybody wants to be looking the right direction when it does. He found me in the crowd. He smiled, that old smile, the one from the rain, the one that thought it had already won. Since everyone's here, Atsushi said, his voice rolling out over 200 of the most important people in the city, let me tell you the truth about this so-called co-owner. This man, Atsushi said into the microphone, lifting his arm to point at me across the hushed hall, is a fraud, a nobody, a con artist who crawled out of the gutter and tricked one of the most respected names in this city into putting a ring on him. Ask him, go on, ask him where the money came from. 200 faces turned, not to me, to him. That was the first thing I noticed. The thing Atsushi was far too deep in his own performance to see. The room didn't swing toward the accused. It swung toward the man holding the microphone he hadn't been handed, screaming in a tuxedo at a gala he'd snuck into through a kitchen. He took the microphone himself. I stood very still with a drink I wasn't drinking. He picked the room. He picked the night. He chose the lighting and the audience and the acoustics. I couldn't have booked a better venue for this if I'd tried, and for the record, I had tried. A few of the older guests had been at the family meeting where his father slapped him. I watched the recognition move across their faces. They were watching the second act of a man coming apart, and they knew it. Money has a long memory for weakness. It was already pricing him out of every room in the city. Ask him, Atsushi said again, louder, because volume was the only tool he had left and he'd always confused it for strength. He has no business, no name, no history. He appeared out of nowhere. Doesn't that bother any of you? A man with no past, suddenly co-owner of a 4 billion holding? Use your heads. I didn't say anything. That was the whole strategy. If you can call standing still a strategy. A guilty man explains. A guilty man rushes to the front, grabs the mic back, lists his credentials, begs the room to believe him. I did none of it. I just let him talk, and every second I stayed silent, the question in the room quietly changed shape. I'd learned that trick on the night shift, of all places. When a customer screams that the register cheated him, the calm one wins every time. Not because he's right, but because panic is the tell. The man who's lying is the one who can't stop talking, and Atsushi could not stop talking. Why is he the one shouting? A woman near me murmured to her husband, not quite quietly enough. The husband didn't answer, but he took a small step back from the open floor, the way people instinctively back away from someone who's started to come apart in public. One of the older investors did the same, a slow, careful step. Away from Atsushi, the calm older investor, the dangerous one from the family meeting, didn't step back. He did something worse. He took out his phone, not to film, but to make a call, turning quietly toward the wall. When a man like that starts making calls in the middle of your speech is already over. You just haven't been told yet. Keep going, I wanted to tell him. You're doing great, honestly. Don't let me interrupt. The investors near the front had gone very still. The stillness of people running numbers behind their eyes. None of them had come to back a man who screamed, "Money likes quiet." And it had just watched Atsushi prove he had none of it left. Phones had come up all over the room, dozens of them, glowing, lifted, and every single lens was pointed at Atsushi, not at me, the supposed fraud, at the man making the scene. He thought he was broadcasting my exposure to the city. He was, in fact, recording his own in high definition from 40 different angles for an audience that would include people he very much did not want watching. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about making a scene to destroy someone. The recording doesn't care who you meant it to be about. It captures whoever's loudest. And in a city this size, a video of a sweating man screaming about fraud at a 4 billion gala does not stay in the room. It was already leaving the building, frame by frame, hunting for the worst possible eyes to land in front of. Off to the side, I caught sight of Sora. She'd gone pale under the warm lights, and she was holding a glass of wine in a grip that had gone white at the knuckles. The wine trembled at the rim, a thin red shiver, threatening to spill. She didn't drink it. She just held it, staring at the scene, at Atsushi, at me, at how completely unbothered I was. And slowly, carefully, she set the untouched glass down on the nearest table like it had become too heavy to hold. For years I'd watched her read a room. She was good at it. Better than Atsushi, always had been. And right now, her reading was screaming at her, and she was the only person on his side of the line who could feel the floor going. Her eyes went to the exits. She didn't move. There was nowhere left in that hall to stand that wasn't already on camera. You think because you put on a nice suit you belong here? Atsushi went on, sweat shining at his hairline now, the microphone shaking slightly in his hand. I know what you are. I've known since the rain. You're nothing. You were always nothing, and I can prove it. While he swung the mic toward the dark where Ray stood, sits there and protects her little investment. Investment. He'd reached, without knowing it, for her exact word, and the irony of it landed somewhere behind my ribs. I kept my face still. Ray, in the shadows at the stage edge, did not move and did not speak. She wasn't frozen. She was waiting. There's a difference, and only one person in that room could tell. He won't even defend himself, Atsushi shouted, gesturing at me, taking my silence as the proof he needed instead of the trap it was. Look at him. A real man would deny it. Say something. Tell them you're not a fraud, or admit that you are. Prove me wrong. Go on. Prove it in front of everyone. Right now. There it was. The thing I'd been waiting for him to say without ever once prompting him to say it. Prove it in front of everyone. He just demanded, into a live microphone, in front of 200 witnesses and 40 phones, that the truth be put on display. The whole room, right now. I almost felt a flicker of something like gratitude. I hadn't had to maneuver him, corner him, or bait him into a single thing. He'd done the entire job himself, out loud, at full volume, and then signed it by demanding the proof be shown. All I'd had to do was not panic, and wait for him to ask for the one thing I'd already brought. My hands were steady. I noticed it the way you notice weather. 3 months ago, standing in front of this same man on that wet street, they hadn't been. Same enemy, same contempt rolling off him in waves. The only thing that had changed was that this time I knew something he didn't, and knowledge, it turns out, is the only thing that ever actually steadies a hand. I looked at him for a long moment, then I turned my head, just slightly, toward the security man still hovering at my shoulder, awaiting an instruction that hadn't come. I gave him the smallest nod. Not toward Atsushi. Toward the back of the stage, where the technicians were, where the big screen waited. Dark. Good, I said. One word. Quiet. Not into any microphone, just to the man beside me, and to myself, and maybe to the version of me 3 months back, soaked on a bench, who could never have imagined saying it like this. Atsushi was still talking, still demanding, his voice climbing toward a peak it would never reach. And then the lights went down, not all at once. They dimmed, smooth and deliberate, the way the lights go in a theater right before the part you bought the ticket for. Atsushi's voice faltered in the sudden dark, and I'm telling you all that this— Wait. What? Why is it? The microphone caught his confusion and threw it across the whole silent room. He had asked me to prove him wrong. As the dark settled and a single technician's light bloomed at the back, I almost appreciated the courtesy. I genuinely hate public speaking, always have. Lucky for everyone, I brought a slideshow. Well, to be precise, she did. I just brought the reason for it. There's a rule I'd been living by since that night, and it's the only one that ever mattered. Never tell the room the machine. Show it the result. Nobody buys a ticket to watch you explain the trick. They buy a ticket to watch the face of the man it happens to. So I'd built no speech. I had a screen, a lawyer, and a man who just demanded the lights come find him. A beam of white snapped on, throwing a hard column of light across the hall and onto the enormous screen above the stage. Still blank, still waiting. And out of the darkness, calm and unhurried and absolutely certain, came Ray's voice. Not shouting, not even raised, carried on a microphone she'd picked up the moment his went useless. Since we're all so interested in the truth tonight, Ray said, and you could have heard a pin drop onto the carpet, let's look at the screen. What screen? Atsushi said. His voice had changed. The bluster had thinned out of it, and underneath was something smaller, something that had just felt, for the first time, the floor flex beneath his feet. He turned toward the blank rectangle of light above him. What is this? What are you? There's nothing to show. There's nothing to— He kept saying nothing. There's nothing on that screen. She's bluffing. This is a trick. It's a stunt. There's nothing. He said it the way a man keeps flipping a light switch in a house where the power's already been cut. As if the word itself could drag the room back to the way it was a minute ago, when he was still the one holding the floor and the night was still his to win. I watched him there, lit from above by the cold beam, alone in the middle of a floor he'd cleared himself, a microphone dying in his hand. He still didn't understand. That was the part I'd never be able to explain to anyone afterward. That right up until the last second, he thought he was the one running the room. He'd brought himself here. He'd cleared the stage. He'd demanded the proof. He'd done every single piece of the work, and he still thought he was winning. Ray stepped forward into the edge of the light, unhurried, every movement precise. She didn't look at Atsushi. She looked at the room, at the investors, the cameras, the 200 people who'd come to celebrate a merger and were about to get a far better story. And then she looked for just a second at me, in the dark at the side of it all, and something passed between us that the contract had never had a clause for. For 1 second, she wasn't an heiress, and I wasn't a contract. We were just two people who'd found each other across an enormous cold distance, who both knew exactly what the next 90 seconds were going to do, and who had decided, separately, and then together, to let it happen. Then the second passed. She turned back to the room and became the blade again. Some of you have asked where my husband came from, Ray said. What he owns, what he's worth. It's a fair question. I don't like leaving fair questions to gossip. She nodded once to the technician. So, no more whispering. Let's all read it together, off the same page in the light. The big screen flickered. A logo resolved. Then a header, stark white letters on black, beginning to load. Across the hall, the murmur rose and then died. 200 people leaning in toward the same glowing rectangle. Phones lifting again, every lens swinging now from Atsushi to the screen above him. I'd seen that header 100 times in the small hours, alone with a laptop and a cold coffee, building the boring, methodical, unglamorous thing that was about to fill a wall 3 stories tall. It had never once looked dramatic on my screen. Funny what a good projector and 200 held breaths can do for a few rows of numbers. Atsushi had asked the room a real question, by accident. In all his shouting, where did the money come from? The screen was about to answer it. Not with a story about me, with a story about him, told in his own numbers, in his own hand. The best reveals were never really about the hero anyway. They're about finally seeing the villain in full light and realizing he'd been standing in it the whole time. Atsushi turned to face it too, because what else could he do? And the cold light washed over his upturned face, and his mouth was still half open around a sentence he'd never get to finish. Somewhere in the dark, Sora had stopped breathing, and I stood at the edge of it all, hands in my pockets, and waited for the room to read out loud the one thing Atsushi had never thought to check. His own name, and whose hands his debts were sitting in. The screen finished loading, and the whole hall read it at once. A lawyer had stepped up beside Ray in the cold light, a thin folder open in her hands. When the room had gone as quiet as a room that size can go, she began to read, not loudly, just clearly, the way you read a verdict. I'd asked Ray for one thing when we planned this, the only request I made the whole time. No gloating from the stage, no speech about justice. Just read it flat, like a balance sheet, and let the room do the feeling. A fact lands harder when nobody decorates it. She'd agreed before I finished the sentence. I think she'd been waiting her whole life to meet someone who understood that. Over the past several weeks, the lawyer said, every outstanding loan, lien, and debt obligation issued in the name of Atsushi and his family's holdings has been acquired. Quietly, legally, in full. She paused. The screen showed it in plain rows. Names, dates, amounts, the dull architecture of a man's whole life of borrowing. Every loan bearing Atsushi's name is now held by a single party, and that party is in this room. The hall exhaled. It was a strange sound. 200 people breathing out at the same time, half gasp and half something darker. The sound a crowd makes when it realizes the man it was about to pity is actually the man who walked in already finished. Phones rose higher. Nobody was pointing them at me. They didn't have to. The screen was doing all the work. An older woman near the front pressed a hand to her mouth. A man I recognized as one of the merger's own sponsors quietly stepped sideways, putting distance between himself and the space where Atsushi stood, as if proximity had just become a liability he could be billed for. In a single minute, the most powerful room in the city had finished recalculating exactly who everyone in it was. That's impossible, Atsushi said, his voice barely carried now. He was staring up at the rows of his own debt, lit 3 stories tall, and his face was coming apart in slow motion, the confidence sliding off it like something that had only ever been painted on. No. You can't just, those are private. Those are held by banks. By who? Who holds them? Say the name. Say it. It was the most honest thing he'd said all night, and he didn't even know it. Who holds them? He'd spent a week tearing through every contract Ray owned, every holding, every last thing, certain the danger was somewhere in her empire. It never once occurred to him to look down, at the ground under his own feet, at the debt with his own name on it. The dangerous question is never the one you're shouting, it's the one you forgot to ask. The lawyer looked at me. The whole room, slowly, followed her eyes into the dark at the side of the stage, where I'd been standing the entire time, hands in my pockets, saying nothing. The cold light found me, 200 faces turned, and for the first time all night, I let them look. "It's just time," I said, quietly, not a boast, just the truth of the thing. That's all it is. It isn't clever, and it isn't magic. It's slow work. You spend a long time being told your money's too small to matter, and you learn something the people with big money forget. Small and steady buys the one thing nobody guards, the boring parts, the debt nobody's watching. 3 years ago, I couldn't buy her a handbag. Looking at all of it, the screen, the room, the unraveling man beneath the numbers, the old arithmetic finally changed shape. Turns out slow money doesn't go into handbags. It goes into other people's debt. Non-refundable, as it happens. No receipt. She'd have hated the wrapping. "You did this," Atsushi said, rounding on me, and now there was something raw in it, something almost like understanding arriving far too late. "You planned this, from the rain, from the start." No, I said, and I meant it. "You did this. Every loan on that screen has your signature on it, not mine. You borrowed it, you spent it, you hid it. I just stopped looking away from it. That's the whole crime, Atsushi. I read what you signed." "You can't read a balance sheet," he said, grasping. "You bagged groceries. For 3 years," I said. "You learn exactly where money goes when you're the one who never has any. It hides in the boring places, the line nobody checks, the debt nobody wants. You were very generous with the boring places, Atsushi. I just kept reading after everyone else got bored." He had no answer for that, because there wasn't one. A man can argue with an accusation. He can't argue with his own handwriting, lit up on a wall, in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. He stood in the middle of the cleared floor with a dead microphone in his hand, and the architecture of his own choices burning above his head, and he finally, fully, understood that he had built this himself. I'll tell you the exact moment I decided to do it. Not the rain, not the boutique. It was the night I found the first loan, sitting in plain sight in a public filing, propped up by a second loan, propped up by a third, a house of borrowed cards with his name on every one. I didn't feel anger. I felt the quiet of a man who's spotted the loose thread on a sweater that isn't his. You don't pull it to be cruel. You pull it because it's there, and because someone spent a long time pretending it wasn't. And then, at the back of the hall, the big doors opened. Not the kitchen doors this time, the main ones. And a small group of people came in out of the night, unhurried, unsmiling, the kind of people who never need to raise their voices because the room rearranges itself around them on sight. They had badges. The murmur changed pitch. Atsushi turned toward the sound of the doors, and the last of the color left his face. They crossed the floor without hurry. The crowd parted for them the way crowds do, folding back from a thing they don't want to be standing next to. The one in front held up identification that caught the cold light. "Financial crimes," she said, evenly, to the room and to no one. "We're looking for Atsushi." He wanted the room to hear the truth. The room heard it as they closed the distance. The room heard it. He should have read the fine print on the microphone before he booked it. Some venues come with a follow-up act you didn't order. And here's the thing I'd want on a witness stand. I hadn't called them. I didn't tip off the financial police, didn't whisper in anyone's ear, didn't send so much as an email. They'd been building their case for months in their own quiet building. All Atsushi did tonight was stand up on 40 cameras and scream his own name across the city until it reached the one room I could never have reached for him. "Atsushi," the officer said, stopping in front of him, "we have a warrant. 12 counts of fraud, falsified filings, misrepresented obligations, diverted investor funds. The investigation predates tonight by months. We'd ask you to come with us quietly. Given the audience, I'd take that offer if I were you." 12 counts, months. The words landed on the room with weight because they meant the one thing that mattered. This wasn't mine. I hadn't invented it, planted it, or paid for it. The fraud had been real and growing in the dark for a long time before I ever sat soaked on a bench. All my screen had done was turn the lights on in a cage Atsushi had spent years locking himself inside. That was the part I needed the room to understand, and the part the screen made undeniable. I didn't ruin Atsushi. The timeline ruined Atsushi. The first count predated the rain. The first lie predated me. I was a stranger he chose to humiliate on a wet night, and the only thing I ever did to him in return was survive it and pay attention. Everything else, He signed himself. No, Atsushi said, backing up a step, his head turning, searching the crowd. No, there's been a mistake. This is a setup, she's father. He found him at last, near the front, where the old man had arrived in time to watch the screen. In time to watch all of it. Father, tell them who we are. Tell them this is a mistake. Father, please. The father did not tell them anything. He looked at his son across the cold, bright floor, at the boy he'd slapped, the boy he'd covered for, the boy whose loans were still glowing on the wall above them both. And then, slowly, deliberately, the way you set down something you can no longer carry, he turned his face away. He gave his son the one thing he had left to give him, which was nothing. And that, not the badges, not the warrant, not the 12 counts, was the moment Atsushi actually broke. I saw it happen. The arrest he might have survived. Men survive arrests, hire lawyers, give interviews. But his father, turning away in front of everyone, took something out of him that no verdict ever could. He'd spent his whole life performing for that man's approval, and he'd just watched it leave the room before he did. Atsushi made a sound I won't try to describe. The officers took him gently. That's the part people never expect, how gentle it is, one at each side, and turned him toward the doors. He didn't fight. The fight had gone out of him the moment his father looked away. He'd come through a kitchen tonight to feel important one last time, and he was leaving through the front doors with everyone watching, which, I suppose, was the attention he'd always wanted. Careful what you book a microphone for. I'd spent 3 months being careful about everything, every number, every date, every quiet purchase. He'd spent one evening being careless with a single microphone, and it had cost him more than all my care had bought. There's a lesson in that about the difference between loud men and quiet ones. I didn't say it out loud. The room was already learning it without my help. I felt no surge of triumph as they walked him out. I'd expected to. On the bench, in the rain, I'd have told you this exact moment would taste like everything. It didn't taste like anything. It was just a man walking out into the weather of his own choices, and me off to one side, feeling the strange flatness of finally getting a thing you stopped needing a long time ago. The doors hadn't even closed behind his son when the father crossed the floor toward me. I watched it happen, and I knew what it was before he reached me, because I'd seen the math finish behind his eyes. He came to a stop in front of me, this proud, heavy man who'd called Ray by her first name like an uncle 3 weeks ago. And then, in front of 200 people, he lowered himself down onto his knees. Please, he said, and his voice had nothing left in it but the word. There must be something, an arrangement, a payment plan, a quiet sale, anything. He's my son. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Just, please. There has to be something. His hands were open. A man who'd spent his whole life with closed fists, open-handed on the floor of a gala. Part of me, the part that still remembered that night, the doorman's hand on my arm, the box face down in the puddle, wanted to feel something sharp about it. This was the man whose money had made my humiliation possible, whose name had let his son treat me like trash on the pavement. But the man on the floor wasn't a symbol anymore. He was just old and frightened and out of moves. It's hard to hate a thing that small. I looked down at him, and I didn't enjoy it, which surprised me. There's no pleasure in watching a father break. The cruelty in this family had always flowed one direction, from the top down, and now here was the top, on the marble, asking a man he'd never once noticed for a mercy the system wasn't going to grant. I opened my mouth, though I had no idea what I was going to say. I knew what I wasn't going to do at least. I wasn't going to make him beg longer just to enjoy it. That was a line I'd drawn for myself somewhere around the boardroom, without ever saying it out loud, that whatever I became on the way up, I would not become a man who made people kneel for sport. Every enemy in this story thought cruelty was a kind of strength. I'd spent 3 months quietly proving it was just noise, and I wasn't about to pick it up now that I'd won. I didn't have to find out, because Ray stepped up beside me, and before I could decide anything, she took my hand. She held my hand before I could decide to hold hers, and the whole world narrowed to that one fact, not a public gesture, not a flourish for the cameras. She simply reached over and took my hand in front of everyone, the way you take the hand of the person you've chosen to stand next to for the rest of it, and she looked down at the kneeling man and answered for both of us. There isn't, Ray said. 2 words, not unkind, just final. The investigation isn't ours to stop. It was never ours. Your son did this, over years, with his own name. We didn't build the cage. We just stopped paying the people who kept the door oiled. She didn't let go of my hand. Get up. Kneeling won't help him, and it's beneath you. Whatever else is true, it's beneath you. A billionaire had just taken my hand in front of 200 people, and all I could think about was that my palm was sweating. Some analyst, the numbers I can read in any room, and I still can't get my own hands to behave. She didn't seem to mind. She held on tighter, if anything, like she'd felt the nerve in it and decided to stay. Rule 1, I said to her, very quietly, just for us, under the noise of the room. No feelings. Her thumb moved once across the back of my hand. I'm terrible at my own rules, she said, not looking at me, still facing the room, still perfectly composed. It's the one flaw I allow myself. And that, from Ray, was the closest thing to a love letter the English language was ever going to pry out of her. Around us, the room was emptying in that stunned, careful way crowds leave a place where something enormous has happened. Quiet, not meeting each other's eyes, already rehearsing how they'd tell it. By morning, the whole city would have a version. None of them would get the part that mattered, which wasn't the debt, or the badges, or the slide. It was a woman's hand, taken first, in front of everyone, with nothing to gain by it. The only move all night that wasn't strategy. And at the edge of the crowd, I saw Sora. She'd watched Atsushi go. She'd watched the father fall. And now she watched Ray's hand close around mine. And something went out of her face entirely. The last flicker of the story she'd been telling herself. The one where she'd traded up. The one where she'd chosen right. Her phone slipped out of her fingers. It hit the marble with a crack. She didn't bend to pick it up. She just stared at the screen above us, at the rows of ruined numbers, and not at the phone at her feet, because the phone wasn't where the loss was. She was waiting outside the holdings office a few days later, near the glass entrance, in a coat that was a season old and no longer pretending otherwise. I almost didn't recognize her. Sora, without the armor of borrowed money, was just a tired woman standing in the cold. And I'd spent so long imagining her triumphant that the real thing caught me off guard. Word of the gala had gone everywhere by then. 40 phones had seen to it. The video of Atsushi screaming into a dying microphone had its own life now. Somewhere under it, strangers were already stitching the rest together. The boutique, the boardroom, the rain. Sora had been in some of those frames. She knew what the city was saying. She'd come anyway. I'd imagined this conversation 100 times on that bench. Back when picturing her sorry was the only blanket I had. In the fantasy, I always had a speech ready, something devastating, something she'd carry forever. Standing in front of the real her, I realized I didn't want to deliver a line of it. The speech was for the man in the rain. I wasn't him anymore. Kento, she said, stepping forward as I came out. I knew you'd come this way. I needed to talk to you. 5 minutes, please. After everything, you can give me 5 minutes. Her voice did the thing it used to do. The soft, careful thing, the one that wrapped a request until it looked like a gift she was offering me. I'm listening, I said. I wasn't cruel about it. I just stopped walking and waited, the way you wait for a bus you already know isn't coming. Behind me, at the curb, the Maybach idled, dark and still, with Ray somewhere inside it not watching and seeing everything. I told Ray she didn't need to wait for this. I'll wait, she'd said, in the tone that ended discussions. I think she wanted to see it, not to gloat. Ray doesn't gloat, but to know. To watch the last thread of my old life get tied off, so she'd be certain the man getting back into her car wasn't still carrying it. Fair enough. I'd have wanted to know too. I made a mistake, Sora said, and the words came out in a rush now, like she'd been holding the door on them. A terrible mistake. I was scared, and I was stupid, and Atsushi, he made everything sound so certain. And I followed the certain thing, and it was wrong. I always loved you. You know that. Underneath all of it, I always loved you. You know me. You know that's true. And the strange part was, some thin version of it probably was true. Not love the way I'd meant it the night I bought the bag, but the kind that comes back online the moment the person you threw away turns out to be worth something. It's real enough. It's just not for you. It's for the upgrade. I'd learned to tell the two apart. Atsushi taught me, free of charge. The rain on the night she left me had cost me everything I owned. The rain tonight wasn't even falling yet. And already I had a warm car waiting and a woman in it who'd chosen me back. Same sky, different man standing under it. That, I was learning, is the only revenge that ever holds its value. She's still explaining. The line came dry and tired. She explained me out of her life in about 90 seconds once, across a sticky cafe table, with a car honking outside. Funny how the goodbye is taking so much longer than the betrayal ever did. You know, we hit a dead end, I said. It was quiet. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was hers, her exact words, in her exact tone, handed back across 3 years and a city's worth of rain. I watched her recognize them. I watched them land. Her face did something I'd never seen it do, which was understand fully what she'd actually said to me that night, now that someone was saying it to her. Don't, she said. Don't do that. Don't make this ugly. Another sentence I knew by heart. She reached out as she said it and put her palm on my sleeve. Light, familiar, the gesture of a woman who'd touched that arm 1,000 times and assumed the right to keep doing it. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, and then I reached over and lifted it off, gently. No jerk, no drama, the way you move something that's been set down in the wrong place. I didn't grip her wrist or push her away. I just took her hand off my arm and let it go into the empty air between us, where it hung for a second and then dropped. For all those years, that small touch on my sleeve had been a green light I waited for like a dog. Do this, fix that, want what I want, and I would. I'd built half of who I was around being the man whose arm she could steer. Lifting her hand off felt like setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd stopped feeling it at all. My arm, for the first time in years, was just my arm. I'm not making it ugly, I said. I'm not making it anything. I'm just late. Late by 3 years. Late by one bus, one box in a puddle, one word that turned out to be the wrong one. There was no anger in it. That was the part she couldn't seem to find her footing against. Anger she could have argued with. Indifference left her nothing to hold. Late for what, she said, and her eyes went, just for a second, past me, to the car at the curb, to the impossible dark length of it, to the life it represented, the life she'd watched bow to me in a boutique and stand for me at a gala. And I understood, finally and completely, the thing the whole story had been circling. She wasn't here for me. She was here for the car, for the room that bowed, for the version of me that had become someone the world stood up for. Late for the rest of it, I said, and I almost felt sorry for her because I think she half believed her own speech, the way she'd half believed every speech she'd ever wrapped a knife in. Take care of yourself, Sora. I mean that. I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because I don't think about you enough anymore to want to. She started to say something, my name, maybe, or one more sentence with a knife folded into the softness, but I'd already heard every sentence she had. There's a mercy in walking away before the other person can make it worse for themselves, and after everything, it was the last kind thing I had left to hand her. And that was the cruelest, true thing I'd ever said to anyone, and the only one I didn't regret. I turned and walked to the car. The door opened for me. I got in, out of the cold, into the warm dark, where Ray sat with her phone in her lap, not looking up, having heard or not heard, it didn't matter which. The door closed behind me, with a sound like a sentence ending. Soft, final, expensive. The car pulled away from the curb, smooth and unhurried, and through the window I watched Sora get smaller in the side mirror, standing alone on the pavement outside a building that would never hold a chair with her name on it. And as we drove, the first drops hit the glass, then more. Then the city blurred into that familiar gray wash, and it was raining again, exactly like the night it all began. She'd traded a hard-working man for a shortcut, and the shortcut had walked her right back to the exact spot where she'd started, except now she was the one with nothing, and no headlight was slowing down for her. I didn't arrange that. Nobody did. It's just where the road goes when you spend your whole life trying to skip the part where you earn it. I used to think the rain that first night was the cruelest part, the cold of it, the way it soaked through everything I owned while I sat there with nothing left. I had it backwards. The rain was just weather. Weather doesn't care who you are. It falls on the man in the Maybach and the woman on the bench exactly the same. What changes isn't the rain. It's whether somebody's coming to get you out of it. 3 years ago, I had waited at a bus stop in this same rain for the last bus of the night, watching the water run sideways across the window. Tonight, a car waits for me instead. The funniest part, and it took me this long to learn it, is that the rain was never the punishment. The cold seat was. And the cold seat belongs to whoever's left there waiting. I didn't say any of that out loud. Ray had set her phone down. She was looking out her own window at the rain, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. And the quiet was the comfortable kind now. The kind that doesn't need filling. The wipers kept their slow time. The city slid past, washed and shining, and, for once, entirely beside the point. My mind went to the version of me on that bench at the very bottom, the one who turned his phone off and closed his eyes and decided he had nowhere left to fall. I wished I could tell him to keep his eyes open one more minute. That a car was coming. that the worst night of his life was, against all odds, also the first night of the rest of it. But he wouldn't have believed me. I barely believed it myself, and I was the one it happened to. "Cold out," she said finally, still watching the rain. "Not in here," I said. She turned and looked at me then, and the cool, flawless mask she wore for the rest of the world wasn't on. Just Ray, in the dark of the back seat, with the rain throwing moving light across her face. She reached over, without a word, and took my hand again, the second time. And this time, there was no room to perform it for. Just us. "Don't read into it," she said, and there it was, the almost smile, the real one, the one she'd spent the whole story refusing to spend. "It's an investment, right?" I said. "An investment." And I let her keep the word, because by now I understood it was the only one she had for the thing, and that she was handing me the whole of it dressed up as a balance line, and that this was, from her, everything. Mira had warned me, weeks ago, on a balcony, that the only real danger left was whether I could keep from falling in love in return. I never did answer her. I didn't have to. The answer was sitting in the back of a car in the rain, holding my hand and calling it a line item. And I'd long since stopped being able to read it as anything but exactly what it was.
Revenge makes you stop and turn around. Indifference doesn't even slow down. The deepest punishment for the person who discarded you isn't ruin. It's becoming someone who no longer needs them to lose. Real strength doesn't finish people off. It outgrows them, drives away, and forgets to look back.
We didn't drive past the bus stop on purpose. The city just routes that way, and the rain had thickened, and as we passed, I saw it through the streaked glass, the broken shelter, the bench with the missing slat, the flickering sign. The exact place I'd hit the bottom of my life, with a soaked paper bag and nothing left to lose. There was someone on the bench. I almost didn't look, but the headlights swept across her for half a second as we turned. And I knew the coat, a season old, no longer pretending, Sora. She'd walked there, or the city had carried her there, the way it carries everyone eventually, to the place they belong. She was sitting on the same wet bench I'd sat on 3 years ago, in the same rain, alone, watching a dark car she would never ride in disappear down the avenue. I didn't feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. All the way to the end. I didn't feel much of anything except the warmth of the seat, and Ray's hand in mine, and the small, clean weight of a circle finally closing. The story had started with me on that bench in the rain, watching her drive away in a car that wasn't mine. It ended the same way. We just traded seats, and the coldest seat, it turns out, always belongs to whoever's left waiting. People will tell you the best revenge is success, and they're close, but they have the shape of it wrong. It isn't the car, or the money, or the room that stands when you walk in. It's the not needing. It's reaching a place where the person who broke you could walk back in tomorrow and the temperature in the room would change by exactly nothing. That's the whole prize. Everything else is just the wrapping. The headlights found the far end of the avenue. The rain came down on the empty shelter and the woman on the bench and the city that had never once looked at either of us until now. I reached over and took Ray's hand properly this time, lacing my fingers through hers, no contract clause to hide behind. She let me. Outside, the bench and the rain and the woman on it slid backward into the gray, smaller and smaller, until the window held only the lights of the road ahead. And the car carried us forward, into the warm dark, away, and did not slow down, and did not turn back.